is Walter Lester Kirk III. I'm the son of Walter Lester Kirk Jr. Going to tell you about his experiences in World War II. He was born in 1922. It makes him 96 years old now. He would be telling you this himself, but he's visiting with my sister for a few weeks instead of being here. So I'm going to talk about his war experiences. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, putting the United States into World War II. A couple days later, Germany declared war on the United States, which meant that we now had a war on two fronts. On December 7th, 1942, 1 year later, my dad and one of his friends joined the Navy. They decided, both of them, that they were going to be Navy pilots. So they were called Aviation Cadets. They sent my dad to school to learn how to do navigation, how to do all the parts of an airplane. He learned to fly an airplane, and he had soloed and everything, but then he made a mistake. He took a plane out to go do aerobatics one day out of a field in Kentucky, and he broke two safety rules. He took a plane without a working radio, and he took a plane without topping it off with gas. He flew up, did his aerobatics, and then he realized the clouds had socked in the field he flew out of, and he couldn't find it. He had no radio to try to get a radio bearing or to try to get helped in. He flew around till he found a place where he could crash land, and he landed the plane, although he damaged it. And for that infraction, they threw him out of the aviation thing. His friend made it, ended up flying 4-engine planes, but my dad got washed out. Now, this was at a time in the war when half of the pilots were being killed in the Pacific, in the Navy pilots. My mother claims that she prayed him out of that job. Well, they took him out of that job and they put him as a gunner, to train him as a gunner on the Navy version of the B-24 called the PBY-41. They had waist gunners, and he was trained as a waist gunner. They taught him to shoot skeet, to learn to lead targets. He got to where he could hit 998 out of 1,000 skeet, pretty good. Then they put him on machine guns. He'd have to belt his own ammunition and shoot 4,000 rounds a day to learn how to shoot a machine gun. They finally graduated him from gunnery school, and by that time they had redesigned the airplane he was going to go on, and they put turrets into the waist gunner position. The new plane's called the Privateer. There's one in Pensacola I got to go see one day. Anyway, he was deemed, along with 10 other guys in his class, as too big to fit in the new turrets. So they sent him training again. And this time he learned to be a mechanic on the same airplane. Went to school for it and everything. So from joining the Navy in December of 1942 to November of 1944, he stayed training in the United States, where normally you would have been out sent to war within a few months. Again, my mother claims she prayed him into these jobs, out of the combat role into the support role. They finally sent him to the Pacific. He went out there on a variety of ships. The first ship was considered a fast ship, so it didn't have to convoy. Back then, their submarines were kind of slow. So if the ship was fast enough, they could avoid the submarines. Where if they weren't, they went in a big group called a convoy. Well, the second day at sea, one of the engines broke down on the ship, never worked again, and so they made everybody wear their life vests the whole trip. They were so sure they're going to get torpedoed, but they made it. They went all the way to Guadalcanal. From there, he worked various ships. He went to the Philippines and got stationed on a base in Mindoro on the Philippines. Mindoro is just south of Luzon, where Manila is. It's a little bit southwest of Manila, a little moderate-sized island. And he worked at a field called McGuire Field. His first night there, they just gave him an empty tent. He woke up the next morning, the sun shining through all these holes in the tent. Turned out a P-38 twin-engine plane had crash landed the week before, and all the guns had went off when it burned. and shot this tent up, which is why it was a empty tent. And he eventually got in a better tent, but he never really fought anybody. He had to carry guns on some of his work. One time they had to go out and rescue a plane that had crash landed on a Japanese, abandoned Japanese strip further up in the island. And so they all went carrying various weapons, and they worked on this plane for 2 days. It was all shot up. 3 men were killed in it. And they got it patched up, flew it back to their base. It never flew again. But he was pretty lucky. At this time of the war, by 1945, the Japanese were starting to surrender in the Philippines. He said they would come to the end of the field and squat down, and the MPs would go out there and get them. They kept a little pen of the prisoners there at the beginning of the base. But he managed to survive the whole war. He got bombed once or twice, and but he never really got closely shot at. And again, this is my mother claiming that she prayed him out of the combat role. He finally came back in the end of 1945, early 1946. And interestingly enough, the train that once he got to the United States, the train went through Mobile all the way to Jacksonville, Florida, and let him off. And then he had to ride a bus standing up all the way to Mobile. There was no room. He got back to Mobile, and his mother had sold his car with his permission. Turned out you couldn't buy a car. There were no cars they hadn't made them in several years, and everybody, there was just no cars available for sale. He went for a year or two without owning a car. But he never flew again. He's never flown a plane again. And as far as I know, he's never shot a gun again in his life. And so he had let's just say it wasn't a real combat heavy thing, but he worked hard in the Navy. He did have some injuries that lasted for his lifetime from his Navy experience. And he didn't really talk about it a lot until the last few years. And that's my dad. This is his picture of his Aviation Cadet class. That's him right in the center in the front.
Thank you.